Warning: tube amplifiers have lethal voltages inside them. Please do not attempt to build, test, or repair these without understanding and following all safety protocols. Hey y'all! Well, it's time to do the final video on the Muzishare X7, and I'm going to show you how to replace the coupling caps. We're going to be using these nice Mundorf EVO aluminum oil caps. I know this is another personal preference thing. Some people don't like these. Some people want to use the silver gold, or there's like these giant MyFlex copper foil caps, which honestly would be really challenging to put inside this amp. One of the things that is a little more challenging about this amp than working on a Wilsonton R8 is with the 9-pin tube sockets. There's a lot less room, or a lot less real estate, because the tubes are closer together. The pin sockets obviously have the pins closer together, and they're smaller pins, and so it does take a little more dexterity to do this work on this amp. And like I said, in this amp I'm going to be replacing the four 0.22 UF coupling caps, and I'm also going to be replacing the 0.33 UF ones. I kind of feel like those 0.33 UF ones are kind of optional. I don't think they have as much sonic impact on the circuit as these do. The 0.22 UF, the signal, 100% of it goes through this cap, while the other ones are just referencing the grid of the bottom of the phase splitter to ground, which I don't think has a huge impact on the sound on the capacitor used there. If you look at what's inside the amp, they definitely put a higher quality capacitor and these coupling caps than they did with that tail of the phase splitter. So that's kind of an optional one. It's actually kind of a harder one to get to, but we may have to move it out of the way to get to where these connect up the tube sockets anyway. So if you're already pulling them out, you can decide whether you want to spend that $30 or not. So anyway, that's going to be the final step on this. I did also remove the phono stage board. I've had questions about that. I think the internal phono stage in this amp sounds like trash, and I would not use it if you're wanting high fidelity. I mean, it's just there to say it's there, I think. And so I connected the twisted pair wires up to the shielded wires, or you could, if you really wanted to, replace the whole shielded wire from the front to the back to the RCA jack. There's not enough length on the wire that's there. I didn't feel that was necessary, and so I just connected the twisted pair off the RCA jack to the shielded wire that goes up to the front, and then put some heat shrink tubing and then taped the whole thing up when I was done, and just took the board out. And that gives you a extra RCA input that's line level that is labeled phono. Then you can hook that up to your phono stage, and then you've got a position on the knob that's phono that actually goes to your phono stage. So that's a pretty simple thing to do. I did record a little video segment on it, and somehow I accidentally deleted it, and I don't feel like digging through my recycle bin on the 100 video clips trying to find that one, so you'll just have to figure that on your own. So anyway, let's get to putting these coupling caps in and finish this amp up. Okay, so we're going to come in here and replace the coupling caps on this one channel. This is the left channel, and the other side's identical, so I'm just going to show you on one side. First we come in here and disconnect these two caps from this end. And be careful of the barrel of the iron so you don't put it up against the insulation and roast some insulation. But once you detach that end, then you can kind of get these out of the way. The new ones will be easier to put in because they are physically smaller. So then heat that up, get that out of the way, and I highly recommend you take a picture with your cell phone before you start on this, so you don't get lost on which pins or which capacitors go where and all that kind of stuff. So we're going to come in and unsolder the ground side of this cap and pull that little loop off there. Then just connect this in like that. And finally, we'll bend that resistor up so we can get to, push that wire down out of the way. Come in here and desolder that. And it's fairly easy to keep up with which ends the coupling caps go to, because you've got these two resistors that come over here from this tag strip. Like that resistor goes there. And then in the back you got another resistor that comes over to this terminal. And that's where we're going to be hooking up our coupling caps. Make sure that resistor is through that little terminal a little bit. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take the insulation off of these capacitors and put them on the new ones. So the next thing we want to do is solder this end of this capacitor to that terminal, like that. And then we come up here and solder this end up to this bus. And make sure you get the bus hot enough so that you get a nice good solder joint, because it's a lot thicker wire, so you don't want to have a cold solder joint there. And that gets that capacitor done. That's our 0.33 UF cap. And then we have just a couple other solder connections to do, and we'll be done working on this little lamp. So this one is going to go down here to the front resistor, which is the plate, that tube. So come in here, heat this guy up. Get that one soldered in place. And then we get our last little piece of insulation. And I think we can shorten that up just a breath. Slide this down. And solder this one into this tag terminal right here. And then kind of get that one over out of our way over there, and then solder this one in. Like that. We can adjust them a little bit, make them look a little neater. And there we go. We got our coupling caps all installed. And let me show you over here. This is what the other side looks like. Again, they just go from this terminal down to the plate, this terminal to the plate. And this goes from the tail up here to the ground bus. And note the orientation of them. This is the way you want to have them oriented. They're not polarized capacitors, but they do have an outer foil. And putting them in this orientation will ensure that they stay quiet. And we're all done with our coupling caps. The last thing I'm going to do before I put the bottom cover back on it. Before we replace these bias pots over here, we measured 56 volts on the grids of the output tubes. So I'm going to power the amp up, put a voltmeter on the ground, and then with the probe, and adjust the potentiometer until I get 56 volts on the grids of all the tubes. And that'll be a good starting point for setting the bias. And we'll be ready to power this thing up with the tubes in it, set the bias on it, and go give it a listen. Well, that's going to wrap up this round 2 of the mod series on the Muzishare X7. I think this latest revision of putting these test jacks on the top that bypasses the need for these meters will eliminate the main problem point with this amplifier that I've seen, and that's this rotary switch getting oxidized and stop working, which then you can't set the bias, and it basically makes the amp a paperweight, because on a fixed biased amp you absolutely have to be able to set the bias via these pots. I also love these mil-spec pots with the shafts that stick up above the surface just a breath. You can see the screwdriver slots. It just makes it so much easier to adjust that, and they're super high quality. You're never going to have a problem. So there we go. Do recommend putting masking tape on the tops of these transformers if you're going to be working on one of these amps. This paint or finish on this scratch is super easy, and unfortunately one of them I worked on, I learned from mistake not to just set this down even on a towel. All it takes is one little chip of metal and you've got a scratch on the top of the amp that you can kind of buff it out, but it's still, yeah, better just to be safe than sorry and put some tape on it. And finally, I do get a lot of questions about what tubes to use in these or what I like. And the owner of this amp, he followed my recommendation mostly. He got some 1287 of these Electro-Harmonix gold pins. Might be worth trying the JJ gold pin version of a 1287 too. The other 1287 that I like is the new old stock RCA clear tops, and it's a pretty common tube, zillion of them on eBay. I like those in my color preamp, but these Electro-Harmonix gold pin really did sound nice in this amp. On the driver tube, I liked the Gold Lion 12AX7. We tried a bunch of 12AX7s, and it was, I want to say, far and above. Now there's two Gold Lion 12AX7s. Get the more expensive one. I can't remember the code numbers on it, but there's one of them that's like 35 bucks and there's one that's like 70 bucks. Don't buy the cheap one. They don't sound the same. They're different manufacturers. I think they're just, rebranded made in China tubes, where the Gold Lions or something different, the more expensive version. He's got a Telefunken, 12AX7, which he said he really likes, so that's probably a good option too. Another tube worth trying is the PS Vane Horizon 12AX7. See what you think of that. That tube really does have a pretty big impact on the sound, although these 12AU7s do too. And on the rectifier tube, the way the power supply is designed in this amp, the rectifier tube only supplies the power to the driver tubes, which is, milliamps of power. And so you're not going to have the rectifier tube blowing up like you would in an amp like this if it was also rectifying the DC for the power tubes. The power tubes are on a separate bridge silicon rectifier. So I don't think having a really high-end rectifier tube is necessary like you might on an amp that the whole amp's powered from the rectifier tube and has a tendency to arc out and that kind of thing. I don't think you're going to have that issue. So he got a Gold Lion tube. Sovtech would be good. The TAD tubes seem to be really good, or you can hunt down a new old stock one if you want to. I personally haven't heard big changes in like rolling rectifier tubes. Some people say they hear it. I'm not going to question that. Just I personally haven't. And I've tried listening to it on like my 300B amp. trying Gold Line versus Mullard versus, some really high-end new old stock rectifier tubes, and I couldn't hear any difference. So maybe save your money there on rolling those and just get one that you know is going to be reliable. On the output tubes, he went with these Skunkie KT88-Z tubes that I also really like, and his came with this cool little wood box, and this is what these look like. They've got the black coating to help minimize stray electrons or something like that, but these are really nice mellow sounding tubes for a KT88, and in my opinion they really sound closer to like an EL34 tube would, but they're KT88, so you have the extra power. Now if you want something that's more dynamic, you could try a set of those PS Vane Horizon KT88s. They definitely have kind of more detail, and they're, like I said, more dynamic. They have more of that KT120 bass punch kind of sound to it, and maybe for like rock music, or if you've got speakers that are mellower and you're trying to like give them a little dynamic boost, you can do that with different output tubes. Folks have said they put EL34 tubes in these and bias it down to 30 milliamps. No problem. I think you could even bias them a little hotter than that and still be fine. And the other thing, and one of the reasons we changed this choke, is biasing the output tubes hotter does not give you more output power. So understand that. I know people are confused by that. They think, oh, if I bias the tubes hotter, the amp's going to have more power. It doesn't. What it does is the amp stays in class A for a longer period of time, which if you've got like sensitive speakers that you don't need a lot of power to drive, if you bias the amp at like 50 milliamps instead of 40, or bias these tubes at 50 milliamps, which is still way cool enough. That's not anywhere near like biasing them too hot where you're going to be burning tubes up. It'll stay in class A longer, and it might have a cleaner, smoother sound with a punchier bass. So it's worth playing around with that. And with this choke and stuff, you could probably bias them as hot as 60 milliamps, talking about KT88 tubes, and be fine. I would definitely monitor the power transformer temperature and just make sure it's not like stressing that out. I have no idea what this power transformer is actually rated for, so kind of on your own there. If you want to be perfectly safe, just keep it at 40. But I think 50 is something that is going to be safe and not going to cause any problems. And it's worth trying just to see if you hear a difference. So anyway, that's going to wrap up this round 2 of the Muzishare X7. Really like this amp. It won my top 5 under $1,500 amps that I've listened to and worked on. I think it's well built. It's a good value for the money. You're going to be rolling some tubes in it to really get it sounding good, but I think that's true with most tube amps. And yeah, with a few little simple mods, without changing the circuit design or anything, you can add some reliability and usability and future-proof the potential problems that I've seen and have a great tube amp. Do want to add, not doing these anymore. This is kind of my last like R8s or these X7s or anything. I just got too much on my plate to like be doing repair work and mod work. This is pretty time consuming, and every time I quote something like this, after I actually get into it, it's like, well, that was a money loser. And so yeah, I quoted this guy what I would do it for, and I'm gonna stay with that. But yeah, this isn't a money maker for me, at least the way I have my business set up. So please don't email me or put in the comments below, hey, can I send mine to you? Yeah, you'll have to find another repair shop that's willing to do this stuff for you. And there's folks out there that specialize in electronics repair. They'd be happy to do this stuff for you. You can point them these videos and just say, hey, I want you to do that to this amp. And yeah, go give them your money. So anyway, Thanks again to all you folks that support my channel, you regular viewers. If you're enjoying this content, please subscribe to the channel. Please like the video. Thanks to all you Patreon folks and other folks that do things to help support the channel. And until the next series, have a nice day.